Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Trump calls Russia's attack on Ukraine terrible and believes they made a mistake as Zelensky invites the US president to Kyiv. Trump threatens new tariffs on Chinese-made smartphones days after exempting them. And an all-female blast-off. 6 celebrities, including Katy Perry and Gayle King, make history as they travel into space on Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin rocket. Now, talks between the US and Iran took place in Oman at the weekend to discuss Tehran's nuclear program. A second round of meetings will take place this week. Al Arabiya's Hadley Gamble sat down for an exclusive interview with US Energy Secretary Chris Wright, who revealed plans for a US-Saudi nuclear deal, President Trump's energy agenda, and why Washington will not tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran.
Iran talks just taking place over the weekend in Oman. The readout has been, at least from the U.S. side, that these were constructive conversations. In your mind, does that rule out the possibility that the United States could sanction Iranian crude?
I'd say way too early to tell, way too early to tell. We had 4 years of let's appease Iran, let's just ask them to be better actors and not enforce the sanctions that were already in place when the last administration came in. And what happened? Iranian oil exports surged. With the standing in the way of energy, we also had higher prices, higher exports, lots of money. You've seen what's happened with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and a rapid acceleration of the Iranian nuclear program. None of those were good results. Now we have a strong, firm leadership in the United States that's, again, pro-prosperity, pro-peace, and a very firm line on Iran that is just not acceptable, not just for the Middle East, but for the world, to have a nuclear-armed Iran. Strong, resolute leadership in alignment with our allies is going to lead to that positive outcome. We don't know exactly how that'll unfold, but we're not going to tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran.
So is the message to the region, just stick with us, we're going to get those prices back to a sustainable level? Because under 60 is not good for Saudi.
Yeah, again, you're talking short-term oil prices right now. I think the message to the region absolutely is American partnership is back. It's stronger. We're not shunning your industry or not visiting you because we think you're somehow against the world interests, even though you're you're providing the energy sources that make our world go round. Our interest is America is a strong, resolute ally. American leadership is going to lead to strong economic growth, which leads to strong growth in energy demand, which is great for energy producers and for energy consumers.
There was some fear in the opening weeks of the Trump administration that the president might declare war on OPEC. Is that going to happen?
Oh, I don't see that happening at all. The nations here in the Middle East, I think, fundamentally want the same thing we want, which is today we've got 1 billion people that live nice, wonderful, energized lives like you and I do. We have 7 billion people that wish they lived that way. The only way to have those 7 billion people live like you and I is just massively more energy in the world. And to get massively more energy, you have to make long-term, multi-decadal investments in energy production and energy infrastructure and transport to bring that energy around the world. That was frozen for the last 4 years. There's all this attempt that we're going to shame the world into stop growing their consumption of energy. Those 7 billion people just shouldn't deserve lives like us. That's just shameful and that's just wrong. I'm seeing nothing but optimism on my visits here in the Middle East. That sort of common sense has returned to the United States. We're pro-energy, we're pro-prosperity at home, and pro-peace abroad. That's a pretty positive agenda. Nuclear is certainly one of those areas. To get a specific agreement to partner on commercial nuclear development in Saudi Arabia, that'll take a little bit longer. That'll be months, not weeks.
But you're going to get there.
I think it's likely we will.
Now, does that require that the Saudis sign a 1, 2, 3 agreement with the United States?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that won't happen without that agreement being signed.
Correct. Yeah, we'll need a 1, 2, 3 agreement and a broader, specific framework for how we're going to cooperate together and how things will work. But based on the discussion so far and where we stand, I I think it's likely we get there.
Excellent. Is there a bottom in your mind that shale in the United States just won't be profitable anymore?
There's a portfolio of drilling locations. The best operators with the best locations have very low break-even prices. The lower quality operators that have lower quality marginal, have resources that are much lower quality, their price to break-even's much higher. It's more a continuum. There's not a one price it works and one price it doesn't work. But I will say that the price at which it does work has dropped dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years. That's American technology, American innovation, American efficiency in supply chain. So the shale industry has continually reinvented itself and continued to innovate.
And in your mind, those who would say the president's putting us out of business, are they wrong?
Oh, they're wrong. They're wrong. That's concerns about short term, and that's, people always take a trend, however long that trend is, and extrapolate that trend. The world just doesn't work that way.
Now, returning to our top story, and President Trump has said Russia's attack on Sumy was a mistake. Ukraine reported 34 people had been killed. However, Russia claims more than 60 Ukrainian armed forces died in the blast and accused Ukraine of using civilians as human shields. Speaking on board Air Force One, Trump told journalists Russia's attack was a mistake.
I think it was terrible, and I was told they made a mistake, but I think it's a horrible thing. I think the whole war is a horrible thing. I think the war is, for that war to have started, is an abuse of power. This country would have never allowed that war to have started if I were president. They made a mistake. I believe it was, look, you're going to ask them. This is Biden's war. This is not my war.
I'm now joined by former U.S. Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, Mark Kimmitt. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. I'd just like to start that Donald Trump has been posting on Truth Social today in the last few minutes, blaming Biden and Zelensky for the war in Ukraine. He also said when you start a war, you've got to know how to win. Zelensky has expressed doubt about Trump's support. Will the latest outburst add to this?
Well, you just asked a lot of questions. Is this Joe Biden and Vladimir Zelensky's war? One could make an argument for that in certain respects. It's clear that the policy of the United States, particularly with the shameful withdrawal from Afghanistan, the way it was conducted, sent a sign of weakness to President Putin, which he took advantage of. Volodymyr Zelensky was very, very pro support for the president, was very, very anti-Russian. So I think you really can't blame the war on one person or another, but it is clear that a different policy choice that goes all the way back to the whole notion of NATO expansion led to what happened March 2022 when Russia invaded across the borders.
Mark, will Donald Trump change his stance on Putin after the Sumy attack that has killed 34 and injured many more?
Well, first of all, I'm not certain that, other than what the media reports, that President Putin and Donald Trump are best buddies. That may be the media narrative, but it seems to me that President Trump has been fairly consistent. He's not the president of Russia. He's not the president of the Ukraine. He's president of the United States, and he believes that this war was unwise to start, and he wants to finish it.
The main question everyone is asking, though, is will Trump go to Ukraine? We know Vladimir Zelensky has invited him. Do you think this could be a step forward for these talks?
Well, I certainly do. I think the president going over there, demonstrating that he is, in fact, a supporter of peace and not necessarily one side or the other, it's an opportunity to demonstrate that he's engaged in the process, wants to see the war end, wants to see a just end to the war, so that the thousands and thousands of soldiers and civilians that are killed on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, that can end. This is all about ending the war, not necessarily settling any grievances.
So we know, Mark, that Russia has offered an explanation for the attack. They're saying they were targeting Ukrainian officers meeting in Sumy. What do you make of Russia's response to this attack?
Well, I don't think there's evidence to support one answer or the other, but it's certainly the case that Russia has been fairly brutal in how it conducts war. It does not concern itself with civilian casualties, infrastructure that supports civilians, or in general, any kind of casualties at all. When they see war, they see total war. I don't understand why the Russians, with their long history of brutal warfare, would feel even necessary to admit that this was a mistake.
Trump has said Russia's deadly attack on Sumy was a mistake. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron described the attack as an abuse of human rights. Europe and America appear to be far from an agreement on how to end this war. Do you think this is really concerning?
Well, first of all, I think that President Macron is offering a political answer. There's been no evidence one way or the other at this point to suggest whether it was an accident or not. With regards to ending the war, I think Europe still remains concerned about the potential for future attacks into Russia by President Putin. So naturally, they want to continue to support the defense of Ukraine. Obviously, the United States has a different viewpoint about that. But let's hope that the combined efforts of the Europeans and the Americans can get us to a position where there is, as I said earlier, a just and lasting peace.
Mark Kimmitt, former US Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, thank you so much for joining me. President Trump has said Chinese-made smartphones and electronics will not be exempt from tariffs as the US president moves them into a different type of bucket. Earlier today, European stocks bounced back after an official announcement revealed some of these products would escape levies of up to 145%. China had previously asked Trump to completely cancel his tariff plans. These electrical products will now come under a semiconductor tariff, with more details to be announced later this week. Let's speak to Economist Vicky Pryce about all of this now. Vicky, thank you for joining me. So Trump is threatening new tariffs on smartphones days after exempting them. US and European markets are having a positive day. Could we see a tariff war between the US and China possibly averted now?
Well, it sounded like things were going to improve a little bit because, of course, instead of being faced with a 145% tariff rate, something like 20% of all the imports from China that the US has at present would look like, because they were all in the electronics area, exempt from those tariffs. And then came a new announcement that actually perhaps the Chinese ones were not, or there's another confusion, that there would perhaps be a new semiconductor type electronics tariff, which would be levied completely separately to everything else, which would, one presumes, still be lower than the 145%, but would be a little bit like the steel and aluminium tariff of 25%, the pharmaceutical tariff, which may well come. Possibly at the same rate. We don't know yet. There is a lot of discussion about this at present, and there are a lot of worries in Europe. And then, of course, the car 25% import tariff that exists in the US as well. So it is possible that type of product, the electronics component of quite a lot of what comes in to the US, will also fall under a different levy. But we don't know what that levy would be. For the moment, of course, everyone is cheering, saying things are a little bit better, and you've seen what's happening to the markets. They have recovered. They recovered in the US. They have recovered in Europe as well. And from where I'm speaking, the FTSE has done quite well today, recovering a little bit too, rising. So we continued here in Europe with the improvement that took place in on Friday, and that improvement, one keeps one's fingers crossed that it will carry on, but we need a bit more clarity.
Vicky, you mentioned there a lot that there is a lot of uncertainty, if I am correct, when it comes to what Donald Trump is planning to do with these tariffs. And we obviously saw a massive market sell-off last week. How deep is that, and what are the ramifications? And is this uncertainty just going to add to this?
Yes, the uncertainty is not particularly good for investment, for growth, obviously. I mean, people are going to be very, very careful what they do, where they go and position themselves, because, of course, there is the whole issue of quite a lot of firms having moved out of China for a bit and producing various products for the US elsewhere, like in Vietnam. They saw those tariffs suddenly imposed, then taken away. So there is a huge amount of concern about, where it's all going. And there have been revisions of the growth forecast that we had before for the US. There is now an expectation which has increased of recession perhaps happening. It is put, depending on which day you're talking to people on, and what Trump may have announced about tariffs, anywhere from 30% to 60% or even higher by some banks, and then coming down again when those tariffs are eased. So this uncertainty is not helping anyone. And certainly you talked about or referred to the bond markets. They have improved a little bit in the US today, but nevertheless, they are higher than would otherwise have been the case. And there are serious concerns as well as to whether the central bank rates will be coming down as they should to support the economy, as there is a lot of worry about what the inflation implication of those tariffs will be.
Vicky, is Trump's smartphone and electronics olive branch a significant trade war retreat? Was this driven by the possible higher prices that American consumers would be having to fork out?
Well, one would think so. One doesn't know exactly the discussions that may be happening between President Trump and all those big firms like Apple and others, which would have seen prices for their products go up very significantly. So there has been pressure from business all along, that saying quite clearly to President Trump that tariffs are a problem. They would increase their cost of production. The idea of moving everything back to the US and being able to produce anything as cheaply as happens elsewhere is just for the birds. And that has so far, or had so far, a very little impact on the Trump announcements. But I think perhaps the realization of what it would mean for some of those firms and for the consumer must have sunk in. And yes, you could see that as a bit of a retreat. Yes, there'd be these other levies that I mentioned earlier that President Trump has already hinted on electronics, but those levies are likely to be a lot less than what would otherwise have been the case. So yes, I think there is a bit of a retreat, but there is, of course, still retaliation going on. So, for example, on the green side, the green production side, what we've seen is that China has halted or announced it's halting all its rare earth sales to the US. Well, that's going to be a big, big blow to quite a lot of production right now, and increasing costs as well. So he hasn't quite retreated completely yet, and we're still, I'm afraid, in the middle of a tariff war. Let's see how it gets resolved.
Let's just turn to China. Xi Jinping has been visiting Vietnam to boost ties amid the US tariff trade tensions, pledging to boost these economic ties with Southeast Asia. How robust is the Chinese economy, and how will these new trade deals boost them economically?
Well, there is no doubt that there will be a gap left if the situation continues as it is. But remember, of course, we have this pause right now, so we don't have Vietnam having the 46% tariffs to the US that otherwise would be the case. But yes, it has left a gap. Not that the relationships between China and other Southeast Asian countries were not strong anyway, but they will probably strengthen. And that would be beneficial to China. You asked how strong the economy is. It hasn't been particularly strong. I mean, it's strong by other standards, so rising by about 5%, and it's managing that somehow. But there are issues. The export-oriented economy needs to be restructured without any doubt. There's a lot of concern about the domestic economy, and there have been reflationary, if you like, and stimulus measures which have been put into effect in China in order to get the domestic economy to improve. There's been a lot of concern about unemployment, particularly among the young. There has been concern about the property market, which has been supported a little bit, but has been a real drain in China. But they have been consistently reducing their export reliance and more looking at the domestic side improving. But I think they definitely need the links with other countries still, and they will need them for quite some time to come.
Economist Vicky Pryce, great having your insights. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Iran's foreign minister will visit Russia this week in regards to the latest talks between Iran and the US. The discussions surrounding Tehran's nuclear program, which took place in Oman, were said to be positive and constructive. President Trump had threatened military action if a deal on halting the nuclear program was not reached. Current centre-right Ecuador President Daniel Noboa has won the runoff roundup of the country's presidential election and will now serve a full 4-year term. Noboa, who has been in power since November 2023, has called his victory historic. His left-wing rival, Luisa Gonzalez, has said she has not accepted the result and has claimed fraud. 2 British tourists have drowned near the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. A 17-year-old boy and a 46-year-old man, a father and son, were swept out to sea after swimming in 1770 in Queensland. They were both declared dead at the sea after being pulled from the water by a police rescue helicopter. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro was forced to flee his home in the middle of the night after an alleged arsonist set fire to their residence in Harrisburg. Shapiro had potential Democratic candidate for the 2028 presidential nominations said his family woke up at 2 a.m. to bangs on the door by the police. The governor's wife, 4 children and 2 dogs were evacuated as the fire service put out the flames. 2 Israeli missiles hit a hospital in Gaza on Sunday, affecting the emergency department and damaging buildings. No casualties have been reported in the strike. It comes as Hamas leaders begin fresh talks in Cairo for ceasefire agreements with Israel. We can now go live to Tel Aviv to speak to our correspondent there, Trent Murray. Trent, thank you for joining me. So pictures of the hospital ward show the devastating aftermath. What more do we know?
Yeah, that's right, Leigh Ann. Significant destruction at that hospital. It is the Al Ali Hospital near Gaza City. It is thought to be the last hospital in the north of the Gaza Strip providing critical care to patients there. But it was the target of this set of Israeli airstrikes. As you rightly say, 2 missiles are launched from the air by the Israeli Air Force on that facility. The hospital's director is saying the emergency department, the hospital's pharmacy, as well as several other buildings on the compound suffered significant damage during this airstrike operation. We understand right now there were no casualties on the scene from this strike, but it is garnering significant pushback and criticism, including from the Anglican Church. Now, the reason for that is this was, in fact, a Christian-operated hospital. It is part of the Diocese of Jerusalem, part of the Anglican Church. They have criticised this strike for taking place on Palm Sunday, saying that strikes on hospitals shouldn't happen at any time, but this happened on Palm Sunday, which they say is the start of the Holy Week, the most sacred week of the Christian year. And they are criticising the Israeli Air Force for launching this operation during that crucial religious day. We understand, as I say, the hospital is still operating to some degree, but it was the last real health facility operating in that part of the Strip, and it has suffered significant damage because of this operation.
Trent, we have heard from Israeli forces following this latest attack. What exactly have they said?
Yeah, that's right. They have confirmed that they did indeed launch those airstrikes towards not just the hospital, but several other sites on Gaza City on Sunday. What they are saying is that the hospital was being used as, in their words, a Hamas command centre, which was embedded within the hospital itself and was designed to carry out attacks against Israeli troops and civilians. Now, they are saying that they took steps to mitigate harm to civilians. They said that they used precision-guided munitions, in other words, very direct weapons. They had aerial surveillance in place, and they also provided early warnings to civilians in the area that there was going to be a strike to take place, effectively trying to encourage people to keep away. They've also released a fairly lengthy statement criticising Hamas itself. I will read from it. They say that Hamas continues to violate international law by brutally exploiting civilian buildings and the civilian population as human shields for what they describe as their terrorist operations. But that statement, as I say, still hasn't negated exactly what has happened here, with criticism really mounting that once again a health facility, a hospital within the Gaza Strip was targeted.
Hamas said it expects real progress in the talks taking place in Cairo. What more do we know about this meeting happening?
Yeah, well, we know that the Egyptian-led mediation effort is said to be reaching some of its advanced stages. We're sort of at a proposal and counter-proposal stage between Israel and Hamas. Both sides now publicly acknowledging that they are studying the kind of granular detail of what is in this proposal. We are led to believe by several reports, including sources which have spoken to our sister channel, Al Arabiya Arabic, that Hamas has talked about a temporary ceasefire in order to release some of those hostages which are being held by Israel. Israel is now studying that. There is some discrepancies around the numbers, and there are multiple reports here, and it is quite difficult to get an exact answer. But what we believe is that the Israelis are pushing for 10 hostages to be released in order to enact a temporary ceasefire. Hamas initially, we believe, proposed 5, and so they are now both going over those details to see if they can sort of find a middle ground. But it's worth remembering in all of this that while this hostility is happening and the ceasefire has been over, Israel has stopped the delivery of aid to Gaza, and so there is a growing pressure from a humanitarian perspective to allow more food, more medicine to get in there. It is hoped by diplomats and also humanitarian organisations that if this ceasefire can be agreed, then some of that crucial aid may be able to get into the landlocked Gaza Strip.
Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, thank you very much for joining me. A group of celebrities have taken part in an all-female Blue Origin space mission. Earlier today, pop star Katy Perry, TV presenter Gayle King, along with others, became the first all-female crew in more than 60 years to blast into space. Their trip lasted 11 minutes, taking off and landing in West Texas. Here's how some of them described their experience.
This experience is second to being a mom. Wow. Yeah, that's it. That's why it was hard for me to go, because that's all my love right there. And I have to surrender and trust that the universe is going to take care of me and protect me, and also my family and my daughter. Because, like, I am full up from being able to get that gift of being a mom, and to go to space is incredible, and I wanted to model courage and worthiness and fearlessness.
It's oddly quiet when you get up there. It's really quiet and peaceful, and you look down at the planet and you think, that's where we came from? And to me, it's such a reminder about how we need to do better, be better. do better, be better human beings. It's
And what do you mean by that?
processing. Well, it's so nasty and so vitriolic nowadays. And I mean, if everybody could experience that peace that we had up there and the kindness and what it takes to do what we did, all the people that it took to get us up there and get us back safely, I'll never, ever, ever forget.
I'm now joined by astronaut Per Wimmer. Thank you so much for joining me. Great to have you back on the show again. I just wanted to pick up on some of those interviews we've just seen, and one of them from Katy Perry. They seemed very emotional. There wasn't a dry eye in the house as everyone arrived back to Earth. What exactly would have they experienced up there?
Going to space is truly extraordinary, even today, where we have all the technology in the world. So I'm not surprised that they are so touched. I mean, these are very big words they were using in terms of a life experience, etc. But also note that they're talking about what within astronauts we call for the overview effect. All astronauts talk about that when they're gone up. And they kind of look at this little fragile planet Earth, where for some reason or another, we keep fighting each other and there's all sorts of conflicts. But if you talk to a lot of astronauts having gone to space, they really zoom in on sort of, let's protect the Earth, let's be more environmentally conscious, and above all, let's work together. And you see that even today at the International Space Station, where you have Americans and Russians, and it's international, truly, where everybody is collaborating, even though on planet Earth, we're kind of fighting each other to a degree. So that overview effect is really key and very telling about how it is in space. And I think we have a lot to learn. Maybe one day we should send some of our political leaders into space. Maybe they could learn a bit from this.
Maybe, yes. Elon Musk, we know who he's friends with. That could be a possibility. Per, the all-female crew, including the pop star Katy Perry, as we said, they're all back on Earth after reaching space. Do you think this was a space mission, or was it just a visit? It's just tourism, right?
It's a short trip. It's 11 minutes, as you said, and that's just the New Shepard on Blue Origin. It goes up, it goes past the Kármán line. So technically, you do become astronauts when you pass the Kármán line at 100 kilometers up, and then you come back down again. So it is short, but it carries an enormous potential. For them personally, they are clearly very emotionally affected by it in a good way. But also importantly, whether it's celebrities or indeed just normal people or other people going up to inspire a lot of young kids to live out their dreams. When I was a kid, it was not written in the cards that I was ever going to go into space, but it has that potential. And everybody, whether they're young, old, and whatever race or nationality, everybody seems to be so enthusiastic and interested in space. Not everybody wants to go, and that's okay. But I think it's very important that we get more women into space. Historically, that has been lacking. Fortunately, we are catching up. In our program, I think there's about a third of women, and that's very good. But having a female mission like this truly inspires lots of other women, young women, to go up into space and to live out their dreams, most importantly. And I think that's really, really exciting. And I'm so happy for them. And it seems like they've had a trip of their lifetime.
So we're talking about going into space and being inspired by the likes of Katy Perry and Lauren Sanchez and a lot of the other women on board. But the reality is, even if I want to go into space, I just cannot afford it. As an astronaut, tell us how much preparation time would be needed and how much money it would actually have cost to carry this through today.
Yeah, well, Lauren Sanchez perhaps has the huge advantage that her partner is Jeff Bezos, who actually owns the rocket. So I'm sure she got a particularly good deal. But in general, yes, it is a bit expensive. Other people would have paid a 7-digit dollar amount for the privilege. But the good news is, over time, as in any other private industry, you will get other entrants that will compete on service and on cost. So eventually, you will see cheaper access to space. It's a bit like we saw with aviation in the late 20s, early 30s, where it was the privilege for government officials and high net worth individuals. But slowly but surely, look where we have come today. Now flights are, on average, very cheap. Indeed, they are low-cost carriers. So you will see a lowering of prices over time. You will see a lot more launches going on over time. In fact, the pace of rocket launches has gone up a lot. And that's good news. So access to space will become cheaper. So maybe you may not be able to fly tomorrow, but hopefully one day, and keep that dream alive. And this is a source of inspiration. You just keep the dream alive, never give up, fight for it, and eventually you'll make it. Trust me.
Maybe I'll have to meet somebody with a rocket. But just moving on, how momentous is this for Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin as a company?
It's a relatively small thing in the grand scheme of things, to be honest. Yes, I'm sure Jeff is delighted to see his partner go to space and successfully come down safe. But there has been other similar missions that perhaps are less in the media, and that will continue. But Blue Origin has much bigger visions and much bigger plans, including, I mean, Jeff has a personal passion for the moon, so you will see a lot more moon-focused in terms of their bigger rockets, and they have a New Glenn, which can indeed go much higher and carry a much more load. So this is a relatively small thing in the big program of the Blue Origin plans for space, and you will see a lot more orbital stuff coming eventually, and hopefully one day on the moon as well. There's serious financial backing behind it. And lots of talented engineers, and there is lots of other people doing it as well. So competition is on. The space race is on. You will see a lot more. This is just the beginning.
Very exciting. Astronaut Per Wimmer, always great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. Downing Street say it's confident in securing the supply of material needed to keep the blast furnaces at Scunthorpe Steelworks running. However, British government would not comment on what comes next, but said a ship is currently en route with raw materials. Meanwhile, the Chinese embassy is urging the government to act with fairness after passing legislation to take control of British steel. Europe's energy security is fragile more than 3 years after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Since the re-election of President Donald Trump, US liquefied natural gas has helped to plug the Russian supply gap in Europe. But there's growing concern Trump has made LNG a politically loaded commodity. Against this backdrop, French and German firms are open to modest return of Russia's Gazprom gas. Turning to all the sports news now. Rory McIlroy has completed a career Grand Slam in golf with his win at the US Masters tournament, a feat only 5 others have managed before him. McIlroy, who was making his 11th attempt at completing the Grand Slam, faced off against Ryder Cup teammate Justin Rose in a sudden death playoff to decide the Masters champion. And Newcastle secured their first league double over Manchester United since 1930 on Sunday. It was also the first time they netted 4 goals in a Premier League game against the Red Devils for the first time since September 2001. The thumping 4-1 win for Newcastle, a triumph for Jason Tyndall. A reminder of our top stories. President Trump calls Russia's attack on Ukraine terrible and believes they made a mistake as Zelensky invites the US president to Kyiv. Trump threatens new tariffs on Chinese-made smartphones days after exempting them. And an all-female blast-off. 6 celebrities, including Katy Perry and Gayle King, make history as they travel into space on Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin rocket. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora is coming up next, followed by Hadley Gamble's interview with the US Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with a W News Extra. Goodbye.